Station number 12959, Brigadier Harold Nelson Smith, 1 reel.
Please could you take me through your own personal D-Day memories, going into as much detail as you can recollect and emphasizing what happened to you personally, please?
This is the D-Day landing of the 1st Battalion, the Hampshire Regiment, of which I was the commanding officer. Starting on the 5th of June 1944, it was with a sense of relief when the battalion sailed from the Solent into the Channel on the evening of the 5th of June. Earlier, owing to bad weather, the worst in June for 20 years, D-Day had been postponed 24 hours by General Eisenhower. The soldiers had been living in cramped conditions on board their troop ships for the previous 5 days, and there was not, in fact, even a glass of beer to be had amongst the troops. The 6th of June. It was the weather which was again to play a devastating part on D-Day itself. As the soldiers embarked at 6 a.m. into their small 10-men assault craft, 7 miles from the Normandy coast, there was still a 4-foot sea running and very poor visibility. Despite taking seasick pills, many were soon very ill, and all were drenched by the waves. When about 4 miles away, the coast could be seen dimly through the haze, and morale was raised by the roar of the naval guns in close support. Heavy concentrations of fire by the Royal Navy ships and RAF bombers on the German defences had been planned to take place before the landings. However, due to bad visibility, all this bombardment overshot, and the enemy positions escaped untouched, including those at Le Hamel, as we were soon to find out. The Hampshires had 4 rifle companies as their main assault troops. 2 were to make a direct frontal attack against the main defensive position at Le Hamel, a small coastal village on a headland. Here the Germans had built a large concrete hospital cum strong point, and a number of fortified houses and pillboxes. These had commanding views both out to sea and along the invasion beaches. The 2 other companies were to attack further along the beach through barbed wire fences and minefields and across the sand dunes, and then capture the town of Asnell, a mile inland. As the assault troops closed to within 100 yards of the beach, the first enemy fire was met, but no casualties resulted. It was still the sea that remained the main problem at this stage. First, several landing craft encountered sandbars on which they grounded. Thinking this was the beach proper, our naval crews lowered the ramps, and the leading troops jumped out into 6 foot of water. In their heavy equipment, they sank like stones. Some others, struggling on the surface, were then run over by their own craft, which surged forward with its lightened load. So the first casualties occurred before the landing. Next, because of the weather, the tide was much higher at this hour than normal, and it helped to hide many of the underwater beach obstacles, which were sharp steel rods with mines lashed to them. 2 or 3 craft were lost in this way. Finally, there was a strong cross-current, and instead of our companies assaulting Le Hamel from the front, they found themselves landed 200 yards further down the beach in a disastrous crossfire situation. Much needed support in the form of artillery and amphibious tanks, and more specialized ones called flails, designed to beat a path through the minefields, were scheduled to land with our troops at this time. Also, Royal Marine assault craft with small cannons aboard were to silence the enemy positions as the attack went in. None of this support arrived in the early stages of the beach battle, and the infantry were on their own. Intense enemy fire swept the beaches as the troops touched down and raced across to reach the sand dunes. Losses were heavy, and it was found impossible to capture Le Hamel from the beach. Later, following the fall of Asnel, it was attacked from the rear in the early afternoon, the Germans resisting to the bitter end. The beach was then clear for others to land. Despite all their setbacks and heavy casualties, the Hampshires went on to capture their final D-Day objective right on schedule that evening, and that was the port of Arromanches, 3 miles further along the coast.
Could I ask you, as the CEO, if you were satisfied with the preparations and briefings that you had before you went?
Briefings, yes. I mean, I did it all, funnily enough, in Lord Bewley's Hall down at, where does he live? Bewley River. Bewley Abbey. We were
Yes, I know.
just outside. And I remember telling the troops very, heartily that we would be only finding rubble, barbed wire, and a lot of wrecked defences, because this bombardment was most impressive planning. I merely dismiss it as naval and air force and this and that on this thing. But on paper and on planning, it looked as if the enemy, what do they call it, something, wall?
The Atlantic Wall.
Atlantic Wall, was going to be completely shattered. Owing again, as I say, to the weather, nothing from the air got there. The Navy nor the Air Force got a single hit on the coastal defences. And then, because of the tide and the rough seas, the tanks, they were called DD tanks. I don't know if you've heard of them. They had a great sort of canopy around the top of the tank to stop water getting in. And they were supposed to land with us. They sank. And the artillery were also in open craft and were supposed to be firing on the way in. They never turned up. We would have thought in their launches, these Royal Marine Commandos who were dead behind us and firing like crazy, or supposed to fire like crazy at short range at the enemy defences would be there, but they weren't either. And as I say, the whole planning went to hell because of the rough sea. And that's really why our casualties were so high. Just as a matter of interest, our casualties, I've got here, in 12 hours we suffered 60 officers and men killed and 120 injured. That's 180 in 12 hours, whereas the Gulf was 46 in 6 weeks, and the Falklands was just not far over us. In 2 months they had 270 casualties. So it was very concentrated, wasn't it? It was almost, I wouldn't say a bloodbath, but it was, I was told afterwards that other officers and men in the battalion felt the guts had been torn out of it on that day. It was never quite the same.
What happened to you personally as you went into land?
I was behind the leading companies, and it's a no story, because I'd got 50 yards up the beach and was hit. Some soldier dragged me along a bit further, and I was hit again. And that was really the end of the story. I got up against the sand dunes, thanks to a couple of soldiers dragging me there. And I remember a drip feed after that, and the next thing, I was being evacuated on some enormous American tank landing ship at midnight.
Were you conscious all the time?
No. I remember, as I say, I remember the drip feed, and I remember being taken aboard an American thing. Otherwise, I was out for the count.
Do you know what hit you?
It was mortars, bombs, about 2 of them. And it's very light shrapnel stuff, you know. I've peppered from here all the way down the side to my feet.
From your right shoulder down to your right foot?
That's right, yes. And it took 5 months to repair the bits of nerve and that sort of thing and get the fragments out. But it wasn't heavy, thank God, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here.
And as you went in on D-Day, what were your own feelings as you saw the landing craft going on to the sandbanks and so on?
Well, I was a bit put out. I mean, this was no part of the plan, and it just made it that much more difficult. To suffer casualties, you can well imagine, for a CO before he even got onto the terra firma, was very upsetting.
Did your landing craft go on to a sandbank?
No, luckily. No, it didn't. But one near me did, and I could see it all. But there was no warning by the Navy that these sandbanks existed, and we'd had, I think, mini submarines, so I heard, with frogmen testing or trying out these beaches well beforehand. But there was not a word that sandbars or anything like that existed. Whether they were caused by the storm, I don't know. But that was an unpleasant surprise, I can tell you.
Who was on your landing craft?
Well, I had a sort of mixed bag. I had various members of my battalion headquarters, signallers, intelligence people, and I think I had one beach landing officer. We had strange chaps sort of affiliated to us who did nothing else but stay on the beach and guide the follow-up people in.
In the preparations for D-Day, whereabouts did you do the necessary training?
Well, that of course is all in this booklet here, but it was mainly, the main exercises were done when we were located in the New Forest. And we were, first of all, near Lyndhurst, and later we moved down near Beaulieu Abbey. But they were about I think there were 4 major exercises that we literally went through the procedure, marching down through Southampton, embarking onto troop ships, and then 3 were in Studland Bay, and 1 I think was on something island, no, Portsmouth, or Hayling Island. And of course the result was that the inhabitants, by the 5th and genuine embarkation, took absolutely no notice of us. It was just another exercise as far as they were concerned.
How did the D-Day landing compare with the Sicily landing, which you also took part in?
Well, of course, first of all, Sicily and Italy, again we were front troops, were night, and a very different cup of tea, because we were landed all over the place. But the opposition, of course, was by comparison, it was very light. We had Sicilians on the first one, obviously, and they were holding the coastline, whereas the Hermann Goering division was inland, just waiting to see where we landed. Much the same happened in Italy. We landed at night in a little bay. There was nobody there at all, in fact.
In the tour of Italy?
That's right, yes.